My name is Dan Holm. I'm the co-founder of IT Unity, and we are thrilled today to welcome Senior Product Manager from Microsoft SharePoint team, Bill Baer, the one and only, to debut his new show, Tech Talk, which will be happening every 2 weeks here on Unity Vision at IT Unity. And Bill, let me hand it right over to you and let you say a few things for those maybe half people online who don't know who you are.
Great, thanks, Dan. I'm Bill Baer. I'm a product manager here in our SharePoint product group in Redmond, Washington. On a day-to-day focus, I look after our on-premises releases, hybrid, and migration, kind of the three core areas that my focus is geared towards on any given day. Today, I'm actually coming from you from the suburbs of sunny Seattle as opposed to Redmond.
Oh, you mean your office doesn't look quite like that in Redmond?
Oh, I wish it did.
Big corner office with big, beautiful shelves and lots of light coming through. All right. Well, Bill, thank you so much for joining us. Let's switch right into our presentation mode here. And the format of this show, at least initially, we'll obviously be looking for your feedback, folks, is that Bill will have a conversation about what's coming up in SharePoint 2016 on-prem, hybrid, and other wonderful news from Microsoft. And then we will be answering your questions. So let me give you a quick introduction to what you guys are all seeing. Below our video, you see an open chat, so you have the opportunity to chat with each other. But if you have questions for Bill, please use the middle module, which is the questions for presenter pod. You can enter your questions there. We'll queue them up, and the second half of the show, I will be passing those questions on to Bill. And then finally, over on this side, we've got some resources for you, and we'll be adding to those resources during the course of the event. So please do ask your questions, and we will answer them starting in a bit in the show. But let's start, Bill, with a quick sort of level set, since this is our first opportunity to chat with you about what's happening in Office 365 and SharePoint. Why don't you tell us a little bit about where you guys are in the process of coming to the next releases and major releases?
I think if you think about on-prem, and probably the biggest question that everybody has is kind of that center of gravity, at least in the community, seems to be around SharePoint 2016 and what we're doing with that and how we're progressing with that release. And the easy answer to that question is SharePoint 2016 is a tangible release. By tangible, I mean that we've kicked off our TAP program, which means we have our first round of binaries available for our customers to begin to test and deploy some of the high-level investment areas that we've been able to focus on to date, and to really kind of step back and think about how we look at SharePoint 2016. One of the core areas that we had to think about when we began building the product is where would we derive the foundation for SharePoint 2016 from? And if you think about as early as 2004, when we embarked on this cloud journey with Microsoft Managed Solutions, we really leveraged our on-prem binaries to provide a facility to deliver a service. So in 2004, we were using Portal Server 2003 to deliver Microsoft Managed Solutions. When we moved on to Microsoft Online Services, for those you may be familiar with it as BPOS, we really looked at 2007 and 2010 to provide the foundation for the service. When we announced the new Office, or when we shipped SharePoint 2013, we made a fundamental shift in the way that we develop products. So SharePoint 2013 effectively became the genesis block for SharePoint Online and Office 365. And then it's continually evolved since then. But effectively, that foundation was in SharePoint 2013. Now, as we approach SharePoint 2016, we're in a unique position, particularly in this day and age where cloud and on-premises computing continue to converge, to where we actually looked at the cloud to try to determine what the foundation would be for SharePoint 2016. We've always talked about cloud down innovation, beginning with the 2012 SharePoint conference, and even at SPC 14, we talked a lot about cloud down innovation, how we're going to look to the cloud to think about how we design the next generation of products. And by doing so, we're able to do a number of unique things with SharePoint 2016. First and foremost, we learned a lot about how to run SharePoint at scale. It's one of those things that we never really had experience with from a product perspective in the past. So if you think about some of the pure operational characteristics that you may find in SharePoint 2016, they're all going to be derivatives of our experience running SharePoint at scale. So from a deployment, management, and operations perspective, you can expect things to get a lot better because it's going to be based on our own experience. From a development perspective, you can look across the developer stack, and we're going to more closely integrate those experiences from a development perspective. And then, of course, you have your traditional development models based on full trust code. And, that's one of the easy things that we can say that experience isn't going away. From there, then, we started looking at the actual investments that we want to bring to the users. So, as we mentioned at SPC 14, one of the things we'll look at is what can we take from the cloud and bring back to on-prem, either wholesale or through hybrid and coexistence scenarios. And then we'll continue to look at those value add scenarios that are unique to the on-premises releases. But, kind of the moral of the story is it's an interesting time because as opposed to looking at on-prem as the basis for the cloud, we're now looking at the cloud as the basis for on-prem. So we've kind of flipped things over a little bit, but that's actually a good thing in that we were able to invest so much in the product. And a lot of it are abstract things that you don't see exposed in SharePoint Online or in Office 365. Just some of the back-end logic and the way that we think about how to run a product, at scale. So, there's a unique opportunity there from a SharePoint perspective. So I think, if you're in IT or you're a developer, you're absolutely going to be pleased with some of the stuff that we're going to be able to do. And then if you're an information worker and your focus is on experiences, I think, those experiences are going to be very unique and exciting as well. So it's a really exciting time for SharePoint, particularly as we, transition the way that we build the product.
Bill, as I hear you say that, and as I hear you've talked in the past, I kind of imagine in my own head that the way in which you're creating SharePoint 2016 and packaging it is really quite different. That instead of, in my own head, I imagine instead of spending 3 years building, and releasing, it's almost like, there was 2 years of innovation in the cloud, and then you got to say, oh, let's take these pieces and let's take this is what we learned and spend the last year sort of packaging it up as a product. Is that close to what's happening?
Yeah, I could say that's probably a relatively good definition of the way that we've been thinking about it. So, in the past, there was a long, drawn-out process through which, we worked through the planning exercises to try to understand our audiences and try to understand the needs of our customers, which particular features may or may not resonate. But if you think about it, at the end of the day, a lot of it was a guessing game. Which feature is going to resonate? We'll build this feature, and customers either use it or they don't use it, and then we have another couple of years to kind of go back and reformulate a new plan relative to the next release, where our new cycle, looking towards the cloud as kind of the foundation for on-prem, is we've already gained experience through A/B testing, through telemetry to understand what's resonating, what's not resonating, what's working, what's not working, and then we can begin to bring that down. So what that means is we know the experiences we're going to deliver are going to be experiences that people will use.
That's fantastic. And I hear you talking about bringing certain features on-prem specifically, but also about bringing features from the cloud into on-prem, or sort of, should I say, powering features on-prem from the cloud, bringing the cloud closer to the enterprise. Can you talk a little bit about that philosophy? As it seems different than the past, where it seemed like hybrid was really about giving us a step up. Now it's really about powering our on-prem solutions with cloud services.
Yeah, and hybrid's kind of an interesting scenario, at least in respect to the way that we're approaching it moving forward. So if you think back to SharePoint 2013, when we started to invest in some hybrid scenarios and really kind of double down on cloud. And I think, with that said, before I kind of jump right into hybrid, 2013 represented a release that was based on cloud and enterprise social. And from a cloud perspective, there's a lot of nuggets inside of that product that most people don't actually realize were cloud investments. Stuff like machine translation services, our investments in OAuth, server-to-server authentication. Many of those were already derivatives of Office 365 that found their way into SharePoint 2013. Hybrid was an evolution of a bunch of different necessities that we heard from customers. So if you think about in early 2013, there was a number of customers migrating to Office 365. And what those customers discovered is the net result of that migration were two discrete data silos, and there was really nothing to connect those two from a glue perspective. And one of the big requests that we got was, I need unified discovery. I have these two discrete silos with information in both places, but I can't rationalize that information through a individual facility. So we looked at hybrid search as one mechanism to enable customers to mitigate that particular migration pain point. We did it in kind of three ways through our topologies, which is the outbound direction, searching from on-prem to online. That is based on the concept that the majority of your content resides on premises, whereas the minority resides in the service. Then the inbound topology, which is designed under the premise that the majority of your content would reside in the service as opposed to on premises. And then kind of a bidirectional topology to where discovery can be facilitated through either the cloud or on premises. But really, if you think about what those hybrid investments were representative of, they were largely representative of our desire to resolve a migration pain point. So it was really all about the cloud being a wholesale proposition for customers' content. As we've looked across our hybrid investments in SharePoint 2016, we took a fundamentally different approach to the way that we're going to deliver hybrid experiences. So I think the way that you stated it is a great way to think about it. It's not about bringing your organization to the cloud as much as it's about bringing the cloud back to your organization. So effectively, you can almost think of hybrid as workload as a service, subscribing to cloud capabilities or cloud innovation from your on-premises data center. So hybrid's now just about enriching traditional investments. A great example of which is some of the work that we're doing around the Office Graph and Delve. So today, the Office Graph experience, the Delve experience, assumes that your content would be in Office 365, whether that's a Yammer conversation, an email exchange, attachments, OneDrive for Business, sharing information, storing information in SharePoint sites. However, as we think about hybrid moving forward, again, it's about subscribing to cloud capabilities, workload as a service. So the new Delve investments, the Office Graph investments, are all about enriching your traditional content management and collaborative scenarios on-prem with innovation in the cloud. So effectively, you can think about the ability to take on-prem signals, such as the act of sharing information or organizational structure, pushing that up through the Office Graph, and then having a Delve experience based on your on-premises content. And that content could be SharePoint-based content, Exchange-crawled content, file shares, third-party repositories. So really what we're looking at is you subscribe to cloud capabilities through your on-premises investment as opposed to moving your content to the cloud. So I think we've got a fundamentally unique approach now to hybrid, and it's going to answer a lot of questions around compliance, data sensitivity concerns, investments in customization, because those things can stay. And instead, you're just garnering cloud capacity to facilitate an experience on premises. So it's a pretty cool idea that we have around hybrid. Search is just one aspect of it, and we're investing in a number of different areas as well to ensure that a lot of the unique characteristics of cloud computing can be brought back to on-premises. And many of those things mandate the use of the cloud. So the Office Graph in particular, it's based on a mass of machines to provide that predictive analytics and machine learning experience. So it's not necessarily something that we can shrink wrap and ship on premises, but it is something we endeavor to bring to you by adding the endpoints to our on-premises release. So it's going to be pretty cool.
Well, that's fantastic. I'm noticing in the chat a lot of what you're saying is resonating very strongly with the community. So I'm sure we're all curious about some specifics. When and where can we start learning some of the specifics about SharePoint 2016 and what goodness it's going to include?
Yeah, I think today where we're at from a product development perspective is, as I mentioned earlier, we've already released our first tap bits to our first release tap customers. So that's a pretty major milestone, at least in a product development cycle. Typically, that first tap is not indicative of all the capability that we're going to release in SharePoint 2016. It's fundamentally designed around some of the core infrastructure aspects, so deployment, operations, upgrade, validating that those scenarios work, as well as some other scenarios that we may have already built into the product. So from a, how can you learn more and at what points in time will you begin to learn more? From a disclosure perspective, I think you'll find us over the next couple of weeks, likely through our next Tech Talk and the subsequent Tech Talk. We'll begin to disclose more and more about those specific capabilities. So, today, at least this week, we're not going to say a whole lot about what we're doing in SharePoint 2016. We don't want to set any expectations and then have to back away from those. But over the next Tech Talk and the subsequent Tech Talk, we'll be able to share more and more and begin to disclose what those investments look like. And then obviously in May at Ignite, that effectively kind of represents the grand unveiling of SharePoint 2016, when we actually start to show you what those individual discrete detailed investments look like. And the other thing about Ignite as well, because I saw a couple of questions in the chat, is, there's questions about, is there going to be a 2019? Is there going to be a subsequent release following that? I think the great thing about Ignite is if you look at some of the session list, one of the sessions that we have is an overview and evolution session. And, part of that session is we're going to lay out what our roadmap looks like, for our customers relative to our on-premises releases. Now, kind of the simple answer to the question, will there be a 2019? I think, we've kind of stated it a couple of times and in a number of different ways. So to kind of recap on the ways that we've talked about that in the past is, one, we're going to continue to ship our on-premises releases on a 2 to 3 year cadence, providing there's customer demand. So providing there's a market for on-premises, we're going to continue to invest in on-premises. So we're committed to our on-premises releases. And I know, a lot of what we've talked about over the course of the past 3 years has been Office 365. And, the on-premises conversation has gotten quiet. Now, if you think about the past, even before Office 365, that is indicative of all of our release cycles. So, we typically develop a product. As we lead into the product launch and a little bit thereafter, we tend to talk a lot about the product. And then there's almost a dark period before we reach our next major milestone relative to the next release. The only difference in today's age is we have this thing called Office 365 where we're constantly innovating. So it kind of sets an assumption that Office 365 is taking over our on-prem investments, which couldn't be any further from the truth. It's just that, how many times can we talk about SharePoint 2013 over the course of 3 years? So, like I said, we're committed to our on-prem business. We're going to continue on our 2 to 3 year release cadence. Innovation will occur first in the cloud. We'll then evaluate, what we can bring back to our on-premises customers. And, as it stands today, we don't have any plans that dictate SharePoint 2016 is going to be the last release of our on-premises investments for SharePoint. So, kind of two answers, to that question. And then, coming back to some of the disclosure and release timing questions, obviously Ignite will be a moment not only for Exchange, but for Project Server and Exchange Server and our other server partners to share news about the upcoming or impending releases. And then after Ignite is when we'll start to talk about public beta programs. So, binaries that you can actually download from the download center. And then obviously following public beta, we move our way into the release candidate. But, the news is we're still tracking towards our goals of, shipping SharePoint 2016. And sometime after Ignite, we'll begin to offer public beta. And then, we'll move into our RC phase. And then following RC, we're going to be in a good position to reach the RTM milestone and move it out the door.
Wonderful. Well, and I know we need to get to people's questions, but I have one more question for you because I know many people are still looking at Ignite and whether to come or not. It looks like there's around 600 plus sessions out there now, and as I look through it, I see a heck of a lot of sessions of the kind I would have seen at a SharePoint conference last year, where I'm seeing great stuff about SharePoint and Office 365 and SQL, which of course is part of SharePoint. It seems to me there's a lot there for the SharePoint on-prem only, as well as hybrid and Office 365 customers. Is that a fair read?
Yeah, and I think, one of the things about Ignite is it's kind of interesting. So I can remember back to our first SharePoint conference that we held in Bellevue, and then the subsequent conference that we held in Seattle. And I remember when we first dreamed up this idea of a dedicated SharePoint conference, dedicated to just SharePoint content. And at that particular point in time, in early 2006, we've always had TechEd as a major conference as part of Microsoft. And I remember, in those days, the TechEd audience kind of looked at the SharePoint conference and said, I just don't feel like this is going to work because you're going to sacrifice all the breadth that you used to have in the past. And now it's kind of funny because now that we've reached Ignite, the conversation shifted from, I don't know if you're going to be able to share the same amount of content at Ignite that you could in an SPC. So, we're having, almost the same conversation. We just flipped it over. But I think if you think about what an SPC represented is, sure, it was a hyper-focused SharePoint conference with SharePoint content. But if you look more closely at the session list, if you go back and look at 2014, 2012, 2009, and you look at those sessions, there were SQL sessions, there were identity sessions, there were high availability sessions based both on Windows Server and SQL Server. There were sessions on single sign-on and Active Directory Federation services. There were sessions on System Center, Operations Manager. There were sessions on Hyper-V. And I think what fools people is you kind of look at it and say, okay, those are SharePoint-centric sessions because it's at a SharePoint conference. If you think about Ignite, those same sessions exist. And they exist in a different way. So there is a SQL Server high availability session. It just doesn't have the SharePoint moniker in the title or the abstract, but yet it remains important information for you to understand as a SharePoint administrator. And the same is applicable to Hyper-V, to Windows Server in general. And the other unique thing about Ignite is if you think about the way conferences worked in the past, there was an Exchange conference, a SharePoint conference. There was a SQL conference through PASS. There was Windows announcements, both on the mobile side as well as the server and client side, that occurred at discrete events, whether it was TechEd or PAS or MEC or SPC. The interesting part about Ignite is, as opposed to each product kind of selecting their own moment to deliver news about how they are going to strategically invest moving forward, now you get that in one place. So you don't have to go to MEC, you don't have to go to PAS, you don't have to go to TechEd. All of that is condensed into one conference. So you get all of the latest SQL news, including their roadmap, strategy, and vision, alongside the Windows news, alongside the SharePoint news, and the Exchange news. So you really get this well-rounded infrastructure view across all of SharePoint's dependent technologies. So, in the past, you had 240 sessions that felt like they were dedicated SharePoint sessions, perhaps through an SPC. Now you have well over 600 sessions, and many of them are uniquely applicable to what you need to operate SharePoint. Beyond that, in addition to those 600 plus sessions, there's more sessions that you don't even see yet. What we typically refer to as an embargoed session. And what that means is we're going to make, we have some product or technology announcements that we're not ready to yet disclose to the general public through the title or abstract of the session. So the closer we get to the event, you're going to start seeing these interesting sessions start to appear as part of the session list that are based on unique technologies that we haven't even disclosed publicly in any way, shape, or form yet to date. So there's going to be some really cool stuff coming over the next couple of weeks as well as we lead into this event.
Awesome. Awesome, awesome. Well, with that, let's spend some time with questions. We got lots of questions, and we'll squeeze in as many as we can here, and then maybe we can convince Bill to stay on an extra 5 minutes or so past the scheduled end of the session. But let's pick out a few. There were a lot of questions that came in as you were talking about hybrid, and one of them I think is very interesting as a leadoff question, which is from Jeff. He asks, are there specific types of hybrid? Are there to give the community a better vocabulary for describing the many options? And I actually see that myself. Is there a way we can start talking about hybrid that creates a more nuanced vocabulary for us?
Yeah, and that's kind of one of the things that I've been working on. As we lead into SharePoint 2016 and we begin to put more and more emphasis on hybrid scenarios, the term starts to become relatively overloaded. If you think about hybrid, it's talked about across many technologies. Azure, we'll talk about hybrid. They'll talk about it from a DR perspective. They'll talk about it through ExpressRoute. Exchange will talk about it through mailbox implementations, distribution of mailbox, distribution of users. We'll talk about it from a search and BCS perspective. So it is kind of a difficult term to wrap your head around because it is an overloaded term. I think if you think about, the way that we're going to start to better articulate them is we're going to talk more about how hybrid was representative of seams. And those seams were very visible from a hybrid perspective. There was a distinct boundary between your on-prem and online investments in 2013 in Office 365. And our goal is to, as much as possible, smooth those seams out so the transition between the two technologies becomes more and more seamless. So you can almost think about it as more blended scenarios. The beauty part about it is our objective is to really abstract the cloud from the users. So we don't think that, the act of leveraging cloud innovation from an end user perspective should be an intent driven action. So if you think about it today, from a cloud perspective, even with OneDrive for Business, if you do the integration with SharePoint 2013, from a user's point of view, it's very intent driven. It's a conscious decision for them to navigate to a URL, input that URL, and then authenticate. Our objective is to really blend these experiences to where it's abstract, and they don't ever know that they're leveraging cloud innovation as part of their daily function. So you can imagine working with an on-prem site collection that leverages cloud innovation, and it's blended, very seamlessly to where you don't even realize that that innovation is coming from the cloud. It just looks like it's being delivered, through your on-premises data center. So maybe blended is a better term to use, but as we move forward, we'll continue to kind of toss out different things and see which one sticks. It could be blended, it could be connected experiences, it could be cloud down innovation. There's a number of different ways we think about it, but I don't think we're, at a point where we have a great, singular word that describes what these experiences will encompass.
It's interesting. In the chat window, someone tossed out the idea of the transparent cloud, making it transparent to the end user that they're actually using the cloud. That's an interesting term right there. And what you said just set up a great, probably short question from Richard, which is, will hybrid configuration be easier? It sounds like you're really investing in making not only the end user piece abstract or transparent or whatever we want to call it, but also making it more seamless for the IT professional to configure it.
Yeah, you almost make it sound like it's hard to do today.
Okay, we'll let that one sit just that way. And are some of these hybrid scenarios that you're, Maurice asks, are some of these hybrid scenarios based upon the use of Office 365 and SharePoint components, which obviously it sounds like they are, or also upon some Azure components?
Yeah, so a couple of questions. So coming back to the first one about will we make it easier? The answer to that question is yes. We understand the difficulty that it takes to deploy a hybrid scenario today. Now, for a customer that is publishing SharePoint to the internet and they want to do an outbound configuration, it's relatively simple. But otherwise, most of the hybrid scenarios that we offer today, there are challenges with implementing those, and you're going to find through our hybrid investments is, we obviously wanted to look at different experiences that we could bring back to on-premises. So that was kind of one of our goals. But we also made it a goal of ours to ensure that the ability to leverage those experiences should be relatively easy as well. So you're going to see more and more in a 2016 perspective from a, automation and just simplified configuration. So we're going to make it a lot easier to implement these scenarios. We're not going to build a bunch of great scenarios that nobody can use because we made them too hard to use. Now, on the next part, I think the question was around Azure investments. So, and it looks like my webcam stopped, or maybe it's still running.
Yeah, if you just click stop and restart, Bill, you should be able to get that kicked in again. And Bill, do you mind staying on for an extra 5 minutes or so to answer a few extra questions?
Yeah, sure. So
All right.
Let's go ahead and talk about kind of that Azure components piece. So from an Azure piece, it's something that will be an element of hybrid configurations as well. So it's not that hybrid's going to be explicitly focused on SharePoint and SharePoint Online, and that's probably a great place to start when you think about the evolution of SharePoint blog post. So I still don't see my webcam.
Yeah, no, it's
So
see if I can give it a kick too here.
to, you know,
That
kind
just
of
restarted my camera.
to continue to talk about that piece, if you think about the evolution of SharePoint, we really talked about how in the service, you know, our objective isn't the same as it is on premises. On premises, you know, you measured SharePoint's value being the sum of all of its parts. Whereas in Office 365, from a service perspective, really the way that we think about it is it's not our objective to deliver SharePoint as a platform as much as it's to deliver the unique capabilities that SharePoint provides. Many of those capabilities that you see today, whether it's Delve or whether it's OneDrive or whether it's Office 365 video, they all take root in some fundamental piece of SharePoint. So we're just delivering experiences that address end users' needs as opposed to delivering a platform. And then we have other experiences that are based on unique technologies outside of the Office 365 or SharePoint stack. And those are indicative of stuff like video that leverages Azure Media Services. So, you know, you can find some of these hybrid scenarios. There's going to be some glue that pulls together the Office 365 and SharePoint experience, and that glue is going to be by virtue of Windows Azure.
Awesome. And one other set of questions, I'll sort of crunch them together here, is related to bugs and updates. What has Microsoft learned about the update cycle and about bug fixing through its experience in the cloud that both inform how it's going to do updates in the cloud, as well as how what are perhaps some more high value options for managing updates on-prem?
Yeah, I think, you know, that's another area where we've learned a lot from a service perspective is the way that we orchestrate patching is one of the things that we were able to learn a lot about. And if you think about SharePoint Online and Office 365 in general, we have an obligation to our customers to minimize service disruptions. So we have a financially backed SLA. And you know that SLA is a 3 nines SLA, and that also includes SharePoint Online. So naturally, we get the question of this: how do you maintain 3 nines availability when you know you're relegated to having to perform the same update orchestration that we are on premises, deployment of cumulative updates, public updates, security fixes, and you know the reasoning behind that is because with SharePoint Online, we orchestrated a new way to do patching to where we could facilitate what we effectively call zero downtime patching. So, you know, when I talk about a lot of the infrastructure experience that we have accruing back to our on-premises customers, you know, you can think of some of those opportunities as well. So, you know, the patching story is going to change. It doesn't mean that you won't get CUs. It doesn't mean that you won't get PUs. But what you will see is you're going to receive, you know, a more well-thought orchestration method to deliver patches to your on-prem farms as well that's based on our experience. So that's just another one of those, you know, investments that we've made from a product perspective that will definitely, you know, help our on-prem customers. So as much as possible, we endeavor to take a lot of that experience and put it in a box, you know, for lack of a better description.
Well, fantastic. That's awesome. And I know we could talk forever, Bill. We could eat up your entire day with questions. But there's one question that's been burning on everyone's mind, and I'll make this the last question, then I've got some notes for our viewers here. The burning question is, are you going to raffle off any of the items behind you? That seems to be getting a lot of traction on our Q&A panel.
Yeah, this is actually a collection of trinkets, you know, picked up from all over the world. So little bears from India, pens from Singapore, some teacups from China, you know, some books from Europe. So it's kind of, you know, it's kind of something to fill the space, other than just having, you know, that kind of, you know, mundane look of a bunch of books stacked up. Those are the ones I keep in my office in Redmond. So next week you'll get to, you know, see all of these SharePoint books, you know, going back to 2001. You know, from speaking of, you know, from a swag perspective, at Ignite we've got some really cool stuff. So next week, you know, next week's episode when I'm in Redmond, you know, we can peer into some of the stuff that we'll have. But we've already got some pretty cool SharePoint 2016 swag that we'll be, you know, handing out at the Ignite conference. And, you know, just to give you kind of a hint, we've got some cool shirts, but what sets these shirts apart from others is they're what we call our day one edition SharePoint t-shirts. So when we reach kind of those major milestones from a development perspective, we always kind of do something fun for ourselves internally. I'm going to bring a bunch of those to Ignite. Each one of those is going to be hand signed by all of the developers that built a particular feature as part of the product. So those will be pretty cool. And it'll also have their Twitter handle if they're on Twitter. So then you can connect with individual feature devs, that built specific stuff. So, some of this fun stuff that we do internally, we're definitely going to bring with us. So we'll have some cool stuff to hand out at Ignite.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, there were a lot of questions that we obviously didn't get time for, but this was our first episode. We wanted to sort of set up where you guys are so that we can continue the discussion forward. And for our viewers, in future weeks, we'll be modifying the structure of the show slightly to give more time for Q&A, because obviously there was a lot of demand for that. And also, we're going to be able to start diving into more specifics, as Bill said, as they get closer to launch, that he's going to be able to talk about some of the specific features, some of the specific design decisions, and some of the more strategic issues but ahead of Microsoft with SharePoint 2016 and Office 365. So I specifically avoided those questions this time because I knew the answer would be, we can't talk about it yet. But we're going to have lots more to talk about over the next couple of weeks here. The next episode of Bill Baer's Tech Talk is March 27th, and the registration is available. It's in your resources down here in the lower left-hand corner. Also, one thing we didn't have time to mention that a lot of people don't know is that SharePoint on-prem has a user voice. The link is in the web resources as well, and that's a place where you can go and see the suggestions that are being made for the next version of SharePoint and to vote them up to contribute your voice behind those things. So those resources will be coming, so much more will be coming in future weeks, and we'll look forward to your feedback on this event so we can continue to make it as valuable as possible over time. Bill, thank you so much for coming and spending a half an hour with us today. It was really wonderful to have you here. Are there any parting words you'd like to give out?
Yeah, I think I saw one question which was pretty interesting, which is what in SharePoint, will SharePoint 2016 be different, or what differentiation will there be between 2013 and 2016? So there will be differentiation. So the way that we think about it is, when we thought about building 2016, we started with what we knew. What we knew was we'd been running the service, SharePoint Online, for a substantial period of time. And we learned a lot operationally from an IT perspective. We learned a lot from a development perspective, and we learned a lot from an experiences perspective. So kind of a low-hanging fruit, or the path of least resistance, was to look to the cloud to figure out what we could do from a on-prem perspective. That doesn't mean that the investments end there. So that's kind of, there's three phases to product development, which is, we look to the cloud to determine what our base will be. Once we understand our base, we look to the cloud to determine what innovation we can bring back, something we've always talked about. And we identify those, and we either bring them in wholesale or we bring them in through a connected hybrid experience. Lastly, the other thing then becomes is, once we've identified all those scenarios, then we have the opportunity to look at unique value add scenarios for on-premises. So there will be differentiation between 2013 and 2016. So I just kind of want to leave that as a parting thought, before we move into next week. And then I'll just kind of go through the open chat just to see what's resonating and not with the attendees. And, perhaps I can respond to some of those, next week.
Ha! There we go. Yeah, my connection dropped, which is the first time that's happened to me during an event. So thank you guys for coming. There will be a recording available online within about an hour. On the same page you went to register for the event, you'll find a link to the recording. So feel free to share it with your friends, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the next Tech Talk with Bill Baer. On behalf of everyone at IT Unity, thanks for coming. And once again, thank you so much, Bill.
Thanks, Dan.